Welcome to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, your ticket to all things college football. Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? Join us as we talk college football, from the national championship to college rivalries to bowl games to the Heisman Trophy to which conference is the best. We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between.
Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Ryan Lee. Once again, I'm going to be your host, and I hope you are still staying safe amongst the pandemic. We have got a boatload of things to talk about, including some new updates and news regarding some recruitment going on involving a college and NFL Hall of Famer. We've also got some of our biggest upsets of the week and some of our biggest matchups of the week, as well as from my picks last week. How did I do? What went on? And what were the impacts of each individual game? Each of them were massive in their own way, and each of them were absolutely super impactful. We're going to be talking about all that, but let's get right into it with the first bit of news for today. As I said earlier in that little introduction involving a college and an NFL Hall of Famer, I, of course, am talking about none other than primetime Deion Sanders, because the situation with him is that he is actually a head coach in the NCAA right now, believe it or not. Deion Sanders is actually not only a college football Hall of Famer, not only is he an NFL Hall of Famer, but he is also currently the signal caller, the head coach for the Jackson State University Tigers. And the reason why that's important is because a very nice and heartwarming story came out over the weekend where his son, Shador, changed his commitment from Florida Atlantic to Jackson State. He's a 4-star quarterback. He wanted to play for his dad. It is actually a very nice and heartwarming story. Just being able to see that sort of reconnection and all that of the program. Now, the thing is that Shador Sanders is not that bad of a player. If you look at his statistics and the way he was recruited, 6'1", 198, coming straight out of high school is not bad, to be honest. 4-star prospect. He definitely had a lot of offers. He went to Jackson State. He also had some pretty good stats throughout high school, being able to get 3,400 yards in his final year with 47 pass touchdowns and 4 interceptions. Also threw in a grand total of 200 plus rushing yards, as well as 11 touchdowns on the ground as well. And the reason why any of this is important is the transfer pool is very interesting, because we see this all the time where a player will go to one school, he'll play for a little bit or see what the program is, and he'll completely flip the script. Something that kind of tends to happen relatively frequently. Being able to play essentially any single level in Division I for a lot of people is absolutely huge. Their end goal through all of this is to play Division I, is to even get a chance to play in the NCAA at all. And I kind of think, in my opinion, I saw this story coming out of the summer, and I thought it was a very touching and very good feel-good story for not only somebody who wants nothing more, just not even as a football player, but as a dad, to see his son succeed, but for a son who wants nothing more to get coached by his dad, I think is a beautiful story, if you had to ask me. And these are things that we don't necessarily see very often, where you see different members of a similar family playing in the same program. It is very difficult to see in college. We have one example of that in the NFL with the McCourty twins with the New England Patriots. We saw it with the Pounceys, the offensive linemen, go to the University of Florida together. So being able to see anything like that is stuff you just never really see. And this goes just beyond family. This just goes beyond two people who just know each other from past experience. You see it a lot in the NFL or any professional league. You have two players who previously played together who have that very similar chemistry right out of the gate because they know each other. They know what to expect. And I think it's one of the most difficult things to get, especially in the NCAA game, where you don't really know what to expect because you don't know the pieces around you that well. Everyone is typically most likely from Texas or Florida or wherever, in some random school you've never heard of before. But that happens all the time. And you need to start learning, developing that chemistry right out of the gate. That's why in a lot of sports, in general, they tend to focus on this thing called continuity, which to me is one of the biggest factors when coming into any season. When it comes to players playing together, when it comes to player and coach, whatever it means, the importance of continuity is massive. That's why they always focus on this thing called locker room chemistry. Is it difficult to build on? Is it easy to build on? Is there something that you can work with? Whatever it may be. And this kind of goes a little bit into the newest updates in the rankings because a lot of these teams, not even necessarily a lot of these teams, but a lot of schools in general and a lot of these programs, they're getting hit really hard by the injury bug. We saw it plenty in the NCAA. For example, Alabama's wide receiver Jalen Waddle, he suffered a season-ending ankle injury. What does that do? It messes a little bit with the continuity in that locker room, but they don't seem fazed by it because what they've done to prepare for that is so good. Yes, you could say Alabama lost their top wide receiver, but at the same time, they have all these other guys who can easily step in and fill in that role and have that possibility and create that threat, which is why Alabama is sitting at number 1 at 6-0. The only thing there that's been an absolute constant is the way that they operate. Same can be said about Notre Dame and Brian Kelly and Ian Book. They've been there for 4 years together. They know each other. Finding any sort of consistency and essentially anything that stays the same or can stick around in a very similar way is so difficult to find, especially in a sport where there's a constant turnaround. There's a 4-year turnaround regardless of who you are. I mean, if you include redshirts, then 5-year turnaround every time. The NFL, you could have one person who stays there for their entire 20-year career and nothing really phases them. You can have one person there for 15 years and achieve consistent results. Think of Manning, Brady, Breeze, Rodgers, etc. But in the NCAA, you don't get that luxury. That's why I give these college coaches a lot of credit when it comes to the way they recruit and game plan for the season ahead. For the NFL, it's a matter of who do we have left and who's available of all these players. Who can we get and who can't we get? And the NCAA, it's a little bit different because you are recruiting all these players. You are doing everything you can to sway them into your program. I would understand. I've gone through this process with swimming. Different sports, similar concept. You have multiple schools, multiple teams vying for your services. And essentially what you do, what you choose to do, essentially can flip the course of the entire team. In about 2 years from now, we are going to have probably one of the hottest high school stars in the past several years. The hottest high school prospect is coming in about 2 years. I don't know who he's been the hottest prospect since, but Arch Manning is going to arguably flip an entire program. Andrew Luck had to sit for a year. Peyton, his uncle, went all four. A lot of these guys now, with the constant turnaround, the accelerated skill of the quarterback position, they only get 1, maybe 2 years at most to show they've got what it takes. Dwayne Haskins, for example, the former starting quarterback of the Washington football team, he had to prove he had what it took to even be in the NFL in 1 season. Kyler Murray, he had to win the Heisman Trophy and do all that good stuff and show he was the number 1 overall draft pick in 1 season. Because who was before him? Baker Mayfield. And who came after Kyler to show he had 1 year to prove it all? Jalen Hurts. And they all proved it. Joe Burrow, for example, did not become number 1 overall in 4 years. He had 1. He had 1 year and Ed Orgeron, and that's it. And because of the lack of consistency, not really knowing what you got, Clemson dropped 3 spots. I understand that DJ Oyunlade was absolutely lights out on fire, and I'll get more on that later. But the thing is that he doesn't know the game plan nearly as well as Trevor Lawrence does. And because of that, it's why they fell just 1 score short in overtime, double overtime to be exact, is because Oyunlade is not as refined or skilled or knowledgeable, not that high of a football IQ versus Trevor Lawrence, because he hasn't had the consistency yet. He hasn't had the continuity yet. He's still learning as we go. That's not to say that Trevor Lawrence or Justin Fields or Mac Jones or whoever, it does not to say they aren't learning. It's to show that it takes time. Justin Fields had last year, and the year before that, he was sitting. Mac Jones had last year to sit. Ian Book, he's had 4 years to go so far. Oyunlade, what has he had? He's had effectively 5 games to just sit there and watch. Not full years. But I'll get more into that a little bit later. My biggest surprise, honestly, is Georgia. They dropped 7 spots. They went from 5 to 12 in a heartbeat. And the reason why they dropped so far, because they laid an egg versus Florida. I'll get more on that later. They were supposed to have this defense that could essentially stop anyone. But clearly, it shows that Georgia can only stop bad programs with bad offenses. Because their offense is kind of bad. I'll get more into that in the next segment. My other big faller, who I'm also surprised by, is Michigan. They were supposed to have what it took, and now they're out of the top 25. They have 0 votes to even be on the cusp of the top 25, and unless they can flip something around, they've got no shot. Michigan also laid an egg. For a team that's supposed to be an offensive powerhouse, what do? You keep up with other offensive powerhouse teams. Notre Dame didn't necessarily do that, but they kept up. That's all that matters. Texas A&M, they're not the greatest offensive powerhouse, but they keep up. I could say the same to teams like Cincinnati and BYU. They keep up. It's the least they do. Miami, another great example. In a game like football, whether it's in the NCAA or the NFL level, you're not expected to blow everyone out all the time. But the thing you have to do is at least give yourself a shot. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers versus New Orleans Saints game on Sunday is a perfect example of that. We saw the Saints beat the Buccaneers back in week 1 of the NFL season. It's Tom Brady versus Drew Brees, 2 of the best to ever do it. 2 of the oldest quarterbacks currently in the game. We didn't expect Tampa Bay to blow out New Orleans. We expected them to at least keep up. And what does Tampa Bay do? They lay 31 out in the first half. Drew Brees with 3 touchdown passes. And only 26 minutes of gameplay out of 60. So that's the thing about teams who are great offensively. Or not even teams who are great offensively, but teams who are just supposed to be great. Or in the upper echelon of what they do. It's not to dominate. It's to at least keep up. But I'll get more into that in a bit. That was my ranking and breakdown of the top 25, as well as some of the latest news around the land. And now we're going to be getting into the next segment, including my top games that were not my picks, but just some of the fun ones around the NCAA, including a couple of upsets. That'll be coming up right after this.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
And we're back here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is the Maryland Terrapins taking on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Now, the reason why I'm going to start off with this game in particular is, simply put, it's my upset of the week. There were huge implications that Penn State was going to win this game. Essentially everything I've read, the odds, whatever it may be, it leaned towards Penn State. ESPN's win probability calculator had Penn State clocked in at 96.5% ready to win when kickoff occurred. The Nittany Lions were also minus 27.5. If Penn State wasn't ranked already, they most certainly won't be now. They are tied for dead last in the Big Ten with Illinois, who honestly has shown me nothing. Penn State also has neither. They've shown flashes, but that's about it. Now, the reason why this game, for the most part, is my upset of the week is Maryland is a team that did not really cross my mind when everything first started. Yes, the Terps won 35-19, but the numbers would say a completely different story. 30 first downs for Penn State versus Maryland 16. Time of possession 33.5 minutes versus 26.5 minutes. Yards just barely favoring Penn State, 434 to 405. However, there's a lot of things that really you got to think about when considering this matchup. It's the fact that Penn State also had a trio of turnovers. You had 2 picks by Sean Clifford, and you also had a forced fumble, which resulted in a touchdown. And if you include the turnovers on down, that adds another 2 turnovers, which is 5. One thing that honestly puzzled me about Penn State is that, yes, I understand. You have a 13-play drive. It goes 67 yards. It takes up 6 minutes of clock time. And you're all the way inside of the red zone. You are at the Maryland 7-yard line. I get the idea. I really do. And on fourth down, you want to take a shot at this. But this is good situational awareness. The game just started. You're on the second drive of the game, your first possession of the game. If you're Penn State, why not just take the 3 and chip your way at it? This is the thing that I've never understood about the college game. I understand that it's high-flying offense and whatnot, but at the same time, to me at least, a lot of the proper judgment and, for some reason or another, a lot of the logic just seems to go out the window sometimes. Take a turnover on downs on the first drive when you could easily just take 3 points, make it 7-3, and then just keep the game going. Literally, Maryland's next drive after that turnover on downs was a punt. You get 3 points again, and look, you're right back in it. 1 point game. A lot of what the Nittany Lions did to me makes zero sense at all. A lot of offensive linemen for Penn State just got beat on one-on-ones. There were so many times where literally there'd be what's referred to as the coverage sack, where the secondary would just cover everyone so well that Sean Clifford would literally just have to sit there in the pocket, just wait, and then next thing he knows, he's getting his waist wrapped by the hands of some 300-pound guy. And then there's a sack. Something I never understood. And it's not like Sean Clifford had a bad game. His game wasn't terrible. 340 yards and a trio of touchdowns. But mixed in the fold, what do you get? A pair of interceptions. What else do you get mixed in there? 27 for 57, 47%. While Tulia Tungavailoa, his brother's in the NFL, he's getting 69% of his throws to his receivers. 280-plus yards and a trio of touchdowns. Just pretty solid. Most of those coming to one of two guys. Dante Demas, 86 yards and a touchdown. Raheem Jarrett, 144 yards and a pair. Like, literally, everything about what Maryland did, they essentially couldn't be stopped. I mean, yes, you get a pair of touchdowns to Parker Washington, and yes, you get one for Jenna Dotson, but really, nothing crazy happens there. Sean Clifford coughs it up in the first drive of the second half, and Maryland returns for a touchdown, essentially getting all momentum on their side. And it's not like the Nittany Lions had a bad game on offense or on defense either. They got a trio of sacks on Talia. They got 7 tackles for loss, and they got 4 passes deflected. However, something about Maryland's defense, whatever it may be, just absolutely dominant. Whether it was bad decision-making by Clifford, whether it was not being able to read the defense properly, or whether if it was just as simple as good job disguising coverages by the Terps, good job disguising blitzes, or just simply overpowering your one-on-one and getting away to the quarterback, like the Terps did. 7 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, 6 passes deflected. It's no wonder why Penn State couldn't get anything done, because Maryland gave them nothing until it was garbage time, until they were up 35-7. Even at halftime, they were up 28-7. And then they just happened to get a fumble return for a touchdown on the opening drive. What is that? Realistically, it's some really good defense. It is amazing game planning. They knew that Sean Clifford isn't incredible under pressure. They knew that going into it. And because of that, Penn State is in a very interesting phase. They have to retool. Because according to some stats that I found out, it's the 4th time in 80 years that the Lions have been 0-3. 4 times in 80 years. The last time Penn State was 0-3, 2001, 19 years ago. That means on average, Penn State has been 0-3 roughly once in 20 years. On average. Something's up with Penn State. I don't know what it is. But when you're put as 97% to win before the game starts, a 27.5 point favorite, something's got to change. Either after this season or going into next. That's been my upset of the week. It really was. I had high hopes for Penn State. I really did. But clearly with almost everything in the NCAA, it changes. I just want to go through a little brief segment, just a quick minute, on Heisman Watch. Everyone's expecting it to be Trevor Lawrence. Number 1 overall draft pick, Heisman winner. Honestly, none of that would surprise me. But the thing is that we have some new contenders who would like to say their piece. And Justin Fields, the quarterback from Ohio State, is probably one of the best contenders to win the Heisman aside from Trevor Lawrence. Because ever since he has shown up on the scene, he has been absolutely electric. The game this past weekend against Rutgers, for example, 86% on the completions, 314 yards, 5 touchdowns, including an extra touchdown with his legs, totaling 6 from last week. He's got 11 touchdowns on the air so far. He's got an extra 2 with his legs. Now, Justin Fields is not necessarily known to be a big runner, but he has the ability there if he needs to. He's not going to take off and run on every down, but if he absolutely has to go on every down, he could. The thing about Justin Fields is that he's not necessarily your biggest quarterback or your strongest one, but the thing he does have is this thing called precision. And ever since transferring from Georgia, where he got his chance under Ryan Day, he's been very good. 3,200 yards last year in a full season. He got 41 touchdowns at that point. He's already got 11 in 3 games. But part of the reason why is because he has this thing that a lot of quarterbacks don't have. It's precision, it's accuracy. I want to talk about one more game super quickly. Because I have a small gripe to pick. And it is with teams who feel comfortable with a lead. It's something I never understood. Why do teams get comfortable when they're ahead? The Atlanta Falcons are big-time perpetrators of this. Los Angeles Chargers, big-time perpetrator of this. And our newest victim is the Arizona State Sun Devils. I'm not here to pick on Arizona State specifically. What I am here to think about and pick on is the fact that why do teams as a whole get super complacent when they have a lead? Going into this game, USC had an 85.5% chance of winning this game. At the very pinnacle, it was supposed to be Arizona State 99.9%. And that's right after they were at 27-14. And that was right after USC fumbles the ball in Arizona State territory. They were almost at the red zone of Arizona State, and USC fumbles it. Arizona State recovers it. And they have to punt. SC scores twice. And then all of a sudden, Arizona State, they turn it over on downs twice. I don't get why teams get complacent. I don't get why they just simply sit on it, try to simply run out the clock, and that's it. It's something I've never understood one bit. The way I see it, if you have a lead, rack up the points. Just continue to rack them up. That's the way I see it. For some of these teams, they can make a huge lead in the first half and then do nothing in the second half. Or they get a giant lead in the third quarter and then just sit on it for the fourth quarter. Why? Someone please just tell me why they do that. I get they want to just simply try to run out the clock and rely on their defense. But if the offense has been playing so well, let them go. Just let them score as many points as they can. Pad those stats if you have to. But the last thing you want to do is sit back and get comfortable. Because next thing you know, USC, they get 2 touchdown drives back-to-back, and now Arizona State scrambling. And that's all I got to say about that. That has been my talk about my upset of the week, as well as my newest on the Heisman watch, as well as a little bit of a spiel about the makings of a comeback. And coming up after this, my 3 games of the week. How did I do with my predictions, and how did those pan out, and what is the aftermath of all of that? It's all coming up right after this.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines. They got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Back here for the final time here on the GSMC College Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Ryan Lee here once again, and we have got to go through our picks as per usual. Put your money where your mouth is. Would it be a Wednesday show without it? Absolutely not. And we will simply start off with the fact that this was not my greatest week. I went 0 for 3. 2 of the picks I made weren't even close. One of them I was very close, actually. And I go from 12-5-1 to 12-8-1. Which, not my brightest moment, but all that means is reevaluate and do better next time. So, let's go in through these games one by one. First off, we have got the Indiana Hoosiers versus the Michigan Wolverines. Michigan drops to 1-2. Indiana advances to 3-0. Absolute show for the Hoosiers, especially for their man under center, Michael Penix Jr. He had himself an absolutely great game, 60% on the throws, 342 yards and a trio of touchdowns, as well as Stevie Scott as well, a pair of touchdowns and 97 yards. The thing about Penix is that he's a very unique quarterback. I'd say a little Joe Flacco-esque, kind of. He does mostly the checkdowns and the dump-offs and the what you have it. Because it's the easy completion, it's what gets the ball moving forward. And he will occasionally use his legs. He will occasionally throw the deep ball. But most of what he does is very short. Not really that much depth, at least from what I could see from it. Because even though statistically he is averaging well over 10 yards a pass, not a lot of that's in air yards. A lot of that's in short yards and the yards after the catch. And also, this goes back to the thing that I said in the other game, the Penn State-Maryland game, with not the greatest decision-making in the world. Because Michigan essentially was shut out the entirety of the first half. They got 1 touchdown on their 3rd drive of the game. Every other drive after that was a punt. And that touchdown drive was only 4 plays long. Each one maybe taking up no more than about 2 minutes on the clock at a time. It's things like that where you really need to reevaluate what Michigan's exactly trying to do here. They only got 21 minutes as an entire team on offense. 21 minutes, that is nothing in comparison to the whole grand scheme of things. Every other touchdown they had was one of the longer drives. 3 minutes, 2 minutes. The thing that Harbaugh tried to do was just push the ball down the field as quickly as possible. But Indiana, they decided to do probably one of the best things they could do, which is if they could get far on the field, they would eat as much clock as possible, putting pressure on Michigan every time they had a chance. That's why Joe Milton threw 2 interceptions on the last 2 drives of the game, because of the fact that there was so much pressure on Michigan. They were down by 10 when Milton threw the first one, that Indiana capitalized and turned the lead from 10 to 17. And then desperation time happens. Milton throws the second one. It's what happens when you only get 17 first downs in the entire game, compared to Indiana's 28. On third down, Indiana was at least 50%, 9 for 18. What was Michigan? 27%, 3 for 11. That's not great. It doesn't even change the fact that they had 13 rushing yards on 18 rushing attempts as an entire team. That is one thing I'm not going to understand. It's something I never understood about the college game. I understand the whole thing with the West Coast offense. I understand these more pass-heavy schemes now. However, here's a lot of the issue. It's that sometimes certain things about the game never changed. How you need to have an efficient run game in order to succeed. Think about some of the last several winners of the NCAA championship. You had Travis Etienne and Clyde Edwards-Helaire last year. 2 of the best running backs in the entire NCAA last year. Arguably the top 2. Then the year before, you had Travis Etienne and Najee Harris for Clemson, Alabama. And then you go to 2018, you kind of get a very similar story with Alabama and Georgia, with Najee Harris and Sony Michel. It has nothing to do with the quarterbacks they had. Yeah, Trevor Lawrence and Joe Burrow were really good against each other. And the year before that, you had Trevor Lawrence and Tua. And the year before that, you had Tua and Jake Fromm. But at the same time, none of that matters when you cannot put pressure on the opposing offense by controlling the clock, controlling the game, making them just sit there and be patient and wait. I mean, yeah, it's cool that Michigan got a trio of touchdowns in the air. But at the same time, Indiana was able to score so many other ways, with Stevie Scott getting 2 of them on the ground. Both teams were very similar in terms of defensive pressure. And the crazy thing is that part of that might have contributed with the fact that Indiana got so much pressure in the pass game, with a trio of sacks, 5 tackles for loss, and 4 passes deflected, might have put a little more extra pressure on Jim Harbaugh's offense. Michigan, however, on defense, they couldn't really do anything. 5 passes deflected, 3 tackles for loss, and 0 sacks. What could they do about that? Essentially nothing. I whiffed on Michigan minus 3.5, and I'm at fault for that. I completely overestimated how the Wolverines would perform. It was a whiff on my part. But it's okay, because I have 2 more whiffs to account for, including the Gators versus the Bulldogs of Florida and Georgia, playing in Jacksonville. Now, the thing here that I didn't expect was the really not so great quarterback play of Georgia. Because the thing about Georgia is that they have decent quarterback play, enough to not screw them over, essentially. But as a grand total for DeJuan Mathis and Stetson Bennett, 9 for 29 as a tandem, 112 yards as a pair, 2 touchdowns and 3 interceptions for them combined. I think got Kyle Trask on the other side, 30 for 43, well close to 75%. 474 yards, 4 touchdowns, and a pick. And that even includes Damon Price getting a touchdown on the ground as well. Zamir White got one too. But the big difference is just the dominance that Kyle Trask was able to put on. This kind of goes into a classic adage with the NFL game, which is that Stetson Bennett looked really small compared to Kyle Trask. And the thing is that Stetson Bennett is very okay as a talent. He's one of the shorter quarterbacks at 5'11", but at the same time, he can't do a lot of the stuff that some of the other smaller quarterbacks can do. Russell Wilson can at least move. Drew Brees is super accurate. And Drew Brees is also very precise. Tua so far looks pretty solid because he's so precise. Stetson Bennett only has 55% completion percentage as one of the shorter guys, which for Kirby Smart, maybe that means he has to go into the recruiting pool a little bit better or find something in the transfers.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
The thing is, Kyle Trask is a tower at 6'5", 240, kind of built very similar to Big Ben or Josh Allen. Kirby Smart couldn't do anything on this offense. Don't know what exactly it was. 12 first downs, 2 for 13 on third down. And for context, Florida got 29 first downs, and they were 7 for 16 on third down. 270 yards for Georgia's entire offense versus 571. I mean, yeah, Georgia got more rushing yards, but at the same time, they also got 15 minutes less on the clock. 3 interceptions thrown amongst the two quarterbacks. Georgia was supposed to have this very devastating defense that could essentially suffocate anyone. And they showed it early on. They got 14-0 lead in the first 5 minutes of play. They showed they could do that. The only score after that was garbage time and a pick six. Aside from that, Florida was what Georgia wasn't. To me personally, this Florida versus Georgia game was not just a representation of quarterback versus quarterback. It was representative of how a team can emulate who their quarterback is. Stetson Bennett, relatively small, very situational, only really performs that well when things kind of go his way. From what I saw from Georgia against Florida, the whole team kind of played like the way Stetson Bennett does. And then you got Kyle Trask on the other side. Very big, physical, kind of an alpha. Really willing to force his will on anyone else to get his way. Florida's defense did the exact same thing. That's why they essentially forced Stetson Bennett to sit out for most of the game. That's why DeJuan Mathis had to come in the first place. And then they imposed their will on him as well. In terms of defensive performance, it was very okay for Florida. 3 sacks, 3 tackles for loss, and 3 passes deflected. And Georgia couldn't necessarily get that kind of pressure. 1 sack, 4 tackles for loss, and 5 deflected passes. But the big difference here is the fact that Florida knows this is their chance to get into a spot in the NCAA playoffs as a whole. I talked about this a good chunk in the first segment about Georgia dropping down because they couldn't step up in the moment. I kind of held Georgia, to be honest, in a little bit too high of a regard, very similar to my thought about Michigan. However, for the Gators, this is their chance to leapfrog some of these other teams. They've got a very good shot to do so. The biggest thing I can say that was the plus side for the Gators is they jump from 8 to 6. And they've got a relatively easy schedule coming up for the rest of the year. Yes, they lost the one game to A&M, but they have to play some of not the greatest opponents in the world. Because here's who the Gators have left to play. They have to play the Arkansas Razorbacks, who are currently 3-3 in Florida. And then they go to Vanderbilt, who is currently sitting at 0-5. And then the Gators go to Kentucky, who are currently 2-14 at home. The Gators then travel to Tennessee to play the Volunteers, who are sitting at 2-4. And they end off the year at home versus the LSU Tigers, who are sitting at 2-3 right now. Florida's got a lot that they can handle. And if there's a chance for them to leapfrog A&M and potentially pass any of the number 4 seed to jump into the number 4 seed, it's their time now. And this win versus Georgia kind of ensures all that. Georgia no longer has the services of Jake Fromm anymore. They no longer have a guy who can produce 2,800 yards a year. No longer do they have a guy who can produce 24-plus touchdowns a year and stay under 5 picks with a 60-plus completion percentage. They don't have that anymore. This goes into the last game that I have to talk about. And yeah, I whiffed on Georgia -3 as well. I thought it'd be a lot greater than that. I thought it did a lot. The last game I talked about was a nail-biter. And out of the 3 games, this was maybe my closest one. I will start off with it. I chose Clemson -5.5. And a few nitpicky mistakes could potentially have changed the direction of the entirety of the game. I could say that at the end of the game, Travis Etienne not going out of bounds with only a minute 50 left to go could have changed the entire game. Burns 40 seconds off the clock, forces Notre Dame to drive the field with only a minute 10 instead of a minute 50. I could have said that the Ian Book scramble at the final drive of the game, where he's able to successfully jump over the defender and dive and just barely get his hand out of bounds, could have forced Notre Dame to burn a timeout, time to run down, something like that. I can go into those nitpicky things because the thing is that Clemson and Notre Dame both played their butts off. And Notre Dame 100,000% needed this game. And I say needed this game. The thing that Notre Dame was really good at, it was shutting down Clemson's running attack. Because the thing is that Clemson struggled. 33 carries as a team, 34 yards as a team. Travis Etienne was not much better. 18 carries for 28 yards. That means Notre Dame was doing a really good job at shutting down on the first level and not letting Etienne get to that second level to do where he does most of his damage. It means they were not falling for the shifts. It means they were getting Etienne right out of the gate before he could get anything going. It's why Etienne struggled. It's why the whole run game struggled. And for a team that averaged close to 160 plus yards a game at that point, they're currently now sitting at 150 plus yards on average a game. Kind of says a lot. Now, don't get me wrong. Ian Book had a great performance. 22 for 39 for 310 and a touchdown. And this was also a shootout with DJ Oyungale on the other side. 29 for 44, 439, and 2 touchdowns. Oyungale did get one more with his feet. Etienne did get a touchdown on the ground despite the not-so-great performance. However, Notre Dame is known as a very physical football team. 3 touchdowns and 140 yards for Kyren Williams, including the touchdown to tie the game and seal it in single overtime and double overtime. The thing here is that I said the key matchup of the game was going to be Notre Dame versus Travis Etienne, which is why I thought that Clemson was going to go -5.5. It's because I thought Etienne could run all over Clemson. I whiffed on that one once again. Notre Dame is very physical. They know how to basically power their way into your face. And don't get me wrong, they did an absolutely amazing job at it. It's why Notre Dame got 10 tackles for a loss with a pair of sacks. Clemson's defense also performed very well with a pair of sacks and 8 tackles for loss. They both had really good performances overall. However, some of the differences really key in when it comes to a lot of the different areas of the game. Because the thing is, almost every single stat across the board, numerically, they were neck and neck. 29.5 minutes versus 30.5 minutes. 439 yards, 310. 518 yards, 473. 22 first downs each. 10 for 19 for Notre Dame on third down is 53%. 4 for 15 on third down for Clemson is only 26%. They struggled more than they normally do to keep drives alive. But that's no fault of Clemson. But all credit to Brian Kelly. The crazy thing that I found out is that this is the first time, according to some statistics that I found, that not only was this the first time that head coach of Notre Dame, Brian Kelly, got his first win against a top 5 team, but also it's the first time that Notre Dame won against a number 1 overall team since 1993. And that was the team where they won the national championship. They had Lou Holtz as coach, and they defeated the, at the time, number 1 ranked Florida State, while Notre Dame was number 2 overall. The good thing about Clemson is that this is the last game they have without Trevor Lawrence, if we look on the bright side for Clemson. Because for the ACC, it's the top 2 teams in the entire conference playing in the championship. These are most likely going to be those top 2 teams. Almost hands down. And there's going to be some big differences between them now. Like the fact that Trevor Lawrence is going to be playing, and no virus is going to take him on the sidelines. So we're most likely going to see these teams again. If they're in the top 4, there's a chance we could see them national finals as well. And I hope they get another game something like this, because it was a nail-biter and it was a beauty to watch. However, I have one small gripe with this game. I understand that it is a college tradition. It is something that gets partaken in a lot in college sports culture. But also, common sense has to be played out here. Basic health and safety rules mixed with common sense went out the window. And I understand the excitement that Notre Dame must have gotten as a school mostly independent, mostly without a conference, all of a sudden getting sucked into the ACC with the new seeding and the new conference-only play and defeating the number 1 overall team in the country. I get that. But the number of CDC guidelines broken, oh my goodness. The end of that game was not only crazy because of the way that it panned out, but it was also crazy because of the way that the Notre Dame fans stormed the field. If I watched the replay correctly, a lot of them were maskless. And literally, according to Adam Rittenberg of ESPN, head coach Brian Kelly, the Notre Dame Fighting Irish, told his team in the walkthrough before the game started that when they beat Clemson, not if they beat Clemson, when they beat Clemson, that the fans are most likely going to storm the field and they need to get into the tunnel as soon as possible to risk the virus. And Coach Kelly was the first one through the tunnel, which, number 1, is smart. He understands the circumstances. He understands the culture of the program. And he understands that it's a likely outcome. But at the same time, students of Notre Dame, what are you doing? I understand the excitement, but I will not be surprised if we see a whole bunch of reports saying that X Notre Dame player got COVID, X Notre Dame player got COVID, or X Clemson player got COVID. I'm not going to be surprised by any of that. I will look out for it, and I will report it on the Saturday show. However, I will not be surprised at all. As fun and exciting, as hard-hitting as the game was, there's a reason why so many teams got pushed back for allowing fans in the stadium. But congratulations to Notre Dame nonetheless. you have put yourself in that much of a better position to win the ACC, to potentially host the ACC championship. You might have increased your chances at the NCAA football playoffs in the meantime. That has been it for today. Thank you for tuning in, and be sure to leave a comment and a review. It really helps us out. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. And do not forget to tune in to our next show, which is coming on this Saturday. For all of us here at the GSMC Podcasting Network, I'm Ryan Lee. This has been the GSMC College Football Podcast. I hope you have a great rest of your night.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast, part of the GSMC Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcasts on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type in GSMC to find all of our shows from the GSMC Podcast Network, from football to basketball, baseball to MMA, and even soccer. You can also follow us on Twitter and Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's episode of the Golden State Media Concepts College Football Podcast.